Early this morning, 3 Massachusetts state troopers were arrested on charges of theft of government funds for fraudulently obtaining overtime pay for traffic enforcement shifts on the Massachusetts Turnpike that they actually did not work. Troopers Gary Herman, Paul Season, and Lieutenant David Wilson were arrested this morning without incident and will appear in federal court here in Boston later today. 2 of these men recently resigned from the state police, while 1 is on administrative leave, all in the wake of an ongoing audit at the state police about abuse of overtime practices. All 3 had been assigned to Troop E, which is headquartered in South Boston but has primary responsibility for enforcement along the Massachusetts Turnpike. Troopers in Troop E could earn overtime pay by working shifts in special enforcement initiatives. There were 2 of those, the first being the Accident and Injury Reduction Effort Program, referred to as the AIR program, A-I-R-E, and the second being the X-Team initiative. The goals of both programs were to reduce accidents on the pike by increasing the presence of state troopers on the highway and increasing speeding enforcement. To earn AIR and X-Team overtime pay, troopers were required to work the entirety of a 4 or 8-hour shift, depending which program it was. During those shifts, troopers would conduct traffic enforcement, including issuing speeding citations, of course. Troopers are, of course, required to truthfully report information on the citations that they write, accurately reporting time and date of shift work, the sector of deployment, and traffic citations issued. They also must complete traffic citations, including the identity of the motorist and the vehicle, date, time, and place of the traffic infraction. During a state police internal audit of Troop E in 2017, police radio data was collected for the cruisers of troopers who were suspected of abusing the overtime system. That data included information about whether a particular trooper's cruiser was on or off at a given time. That information could then be cross-referenced with other records, including refueling records for cruisers, trooper inquiries to the onboard CJIS system, from which troopers and their cruisers get information about motorists, and internal state police records of traffic citations issued on a given date and time. As to internal records at the state police for traffic citations, that information could then be cross-referenced with records from the independent RMV database, which would show which citations had actually been issued to a motorist, as opposed to just residing within the state police database. All of this led investigators to a subset of state troopers who were paid for overtime shifts they did not work, a fraud that included forging or altering traffic citations for earlier shifts, but with now altered date and times so he could reuse them for later shifts. He also submitted traffic citations that were simply fabricated. They had never been issued to an actual motorist while he was working. Trooper Herman earned $227,826 in 2016, which included about $63,000 in overtime. Of that, it appears that he fraudulently obtained about $12,500, essentially embezzling taxpayer funds through this scheme. And again, that was a single year. Like Trooper Herman, it appears that Trooper Paul Season altered citations to create the appearance that he had issued them during certain overtime shifts when in fact he had not done that. He also submitted citations that were never actually issued to motorists. Trooper Season earned about $163,000 in 2016, which included about $50,000 in overtime pay. Of that, it appears that in 2016 alone, he defrauded the state police and taxpayers of about $29,000. Finally, according to today's allegations, Lieutenant David Wilson, who was an officer in charge of overtime shifts at Troop E, including signing off on overtime shifts worked, also did not work some or all of his shifts, for which he was nonetheless paid. Like the others, Wilson submitted a mix of altered and fake traffic citations, sometimes called ghost tickets. He He earned about $230,000 in 2016, which included about $68,000 in overtime pay. Of that, it appears that he defrauded the state police and taxpayers of about $12,500 in that year alone. Let me be clear that today's charges are the beginning and not the end of this federal investigation. There will be ongoing federal enforcement in this area aimed at determining whether this is a systemic and especially when it compromises the integrity of a major state-level law enforcement agency. With that, before I take questions, I'd like to turn things over to FBI Special Agent in Charge Hank Shaw. His agents, working with veteran prosecutors in my office, did an outstanding job on this investigation, and they continue to do so. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks, Andy. Shortly after sunrise this morning, special agents from the FBI and the United States Department of Transportation, Office of the Inspector General, arrested 3 Massachusetts State Police troopers who abused the public's trust for their own personal gain. All of them were safely taken into custody without incident at their homes in Charlton, Chester, and Southwick. Each and every one of these troopers took an oath to protect and serve. The public safety. And make no mistake, this case does impact our public safety. It's not just about the work these troopers didn't do and the speeding tickets they did not write. It's about the countless number of motorists who were allowed to operate on the Mass Pike without a license or even a suspended one. The amount of aggressive drivers, criminal activity, or even fugitives who were able to possibly sneak through our state, and the false sense of security the public had in thinking their highways were patrolled and safe. These troopers selfishly tarnished the reputation and badge worn proudly by so many other hardworking members of the Massachusetts State Police, who put their lives on the line for all of us each and every day. Attorney Lelling and his team, as well as SAC Doug Shoemaker and his agents at the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General. I'd also be remiss not to thank Massachusetts State Police Colonel Kerry Gilpin for her dedication, support, and commitment to rooting out corruption and her ongoing efforts to restore the public's confidence in the Massachusetts State Police. Thank you.
Questions?
It seems like this goes so much deeper and that this was part of the culture at Troop E. How far back will this investigation go? How many years back? And just as someone who serves the public, how disheartening is this for you?
Well, as to your first question, we plan on looking back as far as we can in number of years. There is a records retention law, and so it could be that many of the records that we would seek to use don't exist going back more than about 2 years, but we will go back as far as we can. as to it being embedded in the culture, I think that remains to be seen. We're going to wait and see in our investigation whether that is so. It could be a systemic problem in the state police. I think it is slightly premature to say that with confidence. We'll have to see where it goes.
Why should the public have faith in the state police?
Well, state police is a big institution. There are many, many troopers. I don't know how many offhand. I think it would be a mistake to tar all troopers with this kind of conduct. And also I can tell you, as a line prosecutor in this state for many years, I think you need the feds to look into this kind of thing, so you have a truly independent and thorough investigation, and that the public has confidence that that is happening.
Why did you feel like you needed to arrest them at their homes very early this morning? Why not, for instance, have them turn themselves in or what have you? Why did you choose that?
Well, because these are crimes, I can tell you that a general policy of my office is that we arrest people. We don't like to pick and choose categorically who gets arrested and who does not, because it seems like favoritism to the public. As to arrests at their homes early, that is a standard operational approach across cases that we do in this office. I don't know if you want to add more to that.
No, it's safest protocol, and once again, there is no separate set of expectations, or benefit given, to a police officer versus anyone else who would get arrested.
So if you're talking about $54,000 embezzled here combined, how big of a slice of this overall scandal do you think that is? I mean, is that just a small portion, or is that most of the money that was taken from taxpayers?
I think that's, at the end of the day, that's the same question as whether it's a systemic problem or not a systemic problem. We can't know at this sign on that publicly yet.
From what you know so far, would you say that this all could have been prevented if there was better oversight in state police and in this particular troop of all this overtime? It's a lot of money in taxpayer dollars that they get for these overtime shifts.
I'll say generally, I think it is an oversight and compliance question that many police organizations or other organizations that have an overtime shift system have to deal with. Some do it better than others. I'm not an expert on the current internal procedures at the state police. I do think the state police is now committed to fixing this problem. As Special Agent in Charge Shaw mentioned, the colonel of the state police has been cooperative with our efforts, and we hope that continues.
You mentioned ghost tickets. You mentioned ghost tickets. Are there any motorists out there that you believe were harmed with citations that they don't deserve or anything like that because of this alleged fraud?
No. What appears to have happened is what the state police employees here involved in this complaint seem to have done is change the dates on old tickets or fabricated tickets in there entirely and submitted them to the state police. But because the citation was not actually issued to a motorist, that citation can't then go to the RMV because it would eventually become known that the citation was written by the officer, but the officer had in fact never stopped the motorist. So it does not seem that any motorist got a ticket they weren't supposed to get. It's that the state police record-keeping system reflects that tickets were written when in fact they were not. We'll go back as far in years as we can. As I mentioned before, there is a record retention law. It appears that most records of these relevant to this investigation need not be kept more than 2 years back, so we may be limited by that. We will not limit our investigation just to True B. We consider our purview to be state police-wide alternatives.
Do these shifts have to do at all, it doesn't look like it, but perhaps I'm wrong, with the detail work, either for MassDOT or for private parties?
No, this was traffic enforcement work. Both of these programs, the AIR program and the X-Team program, were aimed at increasing state police presence on the Mass Pike in order to increase safety on the Mass Pike roads.
Did your office review any of the records of private details or details for public agencies as part of this?
I'm not going to comment on that.
You mentioned this is just the beginning.
That had come forward prior to this investigation?
No, there was not a whistleblower. I mean, I think some people are aware there was a Channel 5 story on a trooper Chin a while back who was forced to take responsibility for altering a ticket and said publicly that other troopers were involved in that activity, and that was a factor in us pursuing.
You know, this administration has sort of disbanded Troop E, so to speak. Do you think that's a positive step? Is that enough for what you're seeing, what you've investigated?
I think that's a question for the state police. I think it's a positive sign. Again, we've been happy with what we've heard from Colonel Gilpin over at the state police, and she's been supportive of efforts to
Into 2016.
I don't think we know the answer to that. Proving these kinds of crimes is in some ways a record-keeping exercise. You're taking records in 4 or 5 different categories, you're cross-referencing them, and seeing what you come up with. And the reason why I say that is that it's extremely labor-intensive. And so for purposes of today's charges, we focused on the year 2016. We have records beyond 2016, and if they show us information allowing us to prove charges, we'll move forward with those.
Would you say there are any?
Piece, what do you hope the message is with these 3 arrests?
Well, I think the message is twofold, and I said this in my prepared remarks. We look at that, because that kind of rot tends to spread. And in a law enforcement agency, you need its members to be working at the highest level of integrity.
And also, are you surprised by what you've seen so far?
I don't understand the question.
Based on, these are troopers who have the Mass State Police badge, and what you've looked at so far at the amount of overtime that's been embezzled, and as you continue to look into this investigation, are you surprised this was going on?
Well, I think I'd say I'm disappointed to see it going on. I've been in this business a long time. I've seen cases involving law enforcement agencies before. It's always frustrating to see them. It's frustrating for the other members of that law enforcement organization. It's frustrating being in law enforcement myself and seeing the hit to the law enforcement reputation. Sure, it could lead courts to question their integrity and their veracity when they're on the stand, but I'll leave that to other law enforcement, I'll leave that to other prosecuting bodies, like the DA's offices and the courts that they're prosecuting.
Can you just say, with the AG's office also investigating, is this going to be independent, cooperative? What is there any working together on this, or are these separate?
We've had some communication with Maura Healy's office, but the federal investigation is an independent investigation. It's important to us that it be an independent investigation. I think in investigations like this, one of the things you have to think about is public confidence in the result. And so the feds being entirely separate